heavens to hilarity! This is it, sports fans! Television's greatest array of stars, Laff-A-Lympics, presents the round-the-world competition between the Yogi Yahoos, the Scooby-Doobies, and the really rotten. So let's get on with it! Laff-A-Lympics!
Listen up, because I'm about to tell you about the most ambitious crossover event in television history. And it happened in 1977, decades before Marvel even thought about putting Iron Man and Captain America in the same room. I'm talking about Laff-A-Lympics. Now, if you grew up in the 70s, Saturday mornings were sacred. You had your bowl of cereal, you parked yourself in front of that wood-paneled TV set, and you watched Hanna-Barbera cartoons until your mom kicked you outside. But here's the thing. In 1977, Hanna-Barbera did something absolutely insane that most people don't even realize was groundbreaking. They took 45 of their most iconic characters, Yogi Bear, Scooby-Doo, Huckleberry Hound, the whole gang, and threw them into one massive competition show. But get this, what looked like a fun Saturday morning cartoon was actually a desperate corporate strategy to save a struggling animation studio. And the behind-the-scenes story? It's filled with legal battles, character substitutions, and one of the most brilliant marketing moves in TV history. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the complete story of Laff-A-Lympics, how it came to be, why it was such a big deal, and ultimately, why it disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. We're talking about the real story behind those yellow blazers, the characters that almost made it but didn't, and the corporate drama that you never saw on screen. And trust me, by the end of this, you're going to see your childhood Saturday mornings in a completely different light. Let's dive in. The perfect storm of 1977. Alright, so to understand why Laff-A-Lympics even exists, we need to talk about what was happening in 1977. Because this wasn't just some random idea that somebody pitched in a meeting. This was Hanna-Barbera's response to a perfect storm of problems. First off, you've got to remember that by the mid-70s, Hanna-Barbera was under serious pressure. They'd been the kings of Saturday morning television since the late 50s, but now they were facing heat from advocacy groups like Action for Children's Television. These groups were campaigning hard against the slapstick violence in cartoons. You know, all that stuff we loved as kids, like Wile E. Coyote getting flattened by an anvil. Suddenly, that wasn't acceptable anymore. So the networks were demanding more pro-social content, more educational stuff, less violence. And Hanna-Barbera had to figure out how to stay relevant without losing what made their shows fun in the first place. But here's where it gets interesting. In 1976, two massive things happened that gave them the blueprint for Laff-A-Lympics. First, you had the Summer Olympics in Montreal. The whole country was watching. Olympic fever was everywhere. And second, and this is the genius part, ABC aired this primetime special called Battle of the Network Stars. Some of you may remember that show. It was celebrities from different TV networks competing against each other in athletic events. And it was a ratings monster. So some executive at Hanna-Barbera, and I'd love to know who it was, had this light bulb moment. What if we did Battle of the Network Stars, but with our cartoon characters? What if we made it Olympics themed? And what if we threw in every single character we own? And just like that, Laff-A-Lympics was born. But here's what makes this so brilliant from a business perspective. Hanna-Barbera wasn't just making a new show. They were creating a 2-hour programming block called Scooby's All-Star Laff-A-Lympics. This thing was massive. It had new Scooby-Doo episodes, Dynamite, Captain Caveman, and of course, the main event, Laff-A-Lympics itself. When it premiered on September 10th, 1977, it pulled a 7.4 Nielsen rating. That might not sound like much today, but back then, that was huge. ABC dominated Saturday mornings, and Hanna-Barbera had just pulled off the first shared universe in television history, decades before it became a Hollywood buzzword. Now, let's talk about the actual show, because the way they structured this thing was pure genius. They divided 45 characters into 3 teams, and each team represented a different era of Hanna-Barbera's history. This wasn't random. This was strategic brand management. First, you had the Yogi Yahooies. This was the nostalgia team, all the characters from the late 50s and early 60s. Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw McGraw, Snagglepuss. These were the characters that parents grew up with, so it gave the show that multi-generational appeal. Interestingly, the team was named after Yippee, Yappy, and Yahui from the Peter Potamus Show, but those characters weren't even on the team. Go figure. Then you had the Scooby-Doobies, the modern team. This was all the mystery-solving characters from the 70s. Scooby-Doo, Shaggy, Captain Caveman, Speed Buggy, Blue Falcon. These were the characters that kids were currently watching, so they were the stars of the show. And here's a fun fact. The Scooby-Doobies won 14 gold medals throughout the series. They were the dominant team, which makes sense because Scooby-Doo was the biggest brand Hanna-Barbera had at the time. And then, and this is my favorite part, you had the really rottens. These were the villains, the cheaters, the bad guys. And their whole purpose was to create drama and tension. They'd sabotage the other teams, they'd bend the rules, and they'd usually get caught and disqualified. It was perfect for teaching kids that cheaters never win, which satisfied those advocacy groups I mentioned earlier. But here's what made the competition feel legitimate. They had an actual point system. First place got 25 points, second place got 15, third place got 10. And if you got caught cheating, you could lose 25 to 50 points. There was even this one episode where the really rottens won a kangaroo race, but they got disqualified because 3 of them were hiding inside a mechanical kangaroo. The rules said only 1 rider per kangaroo. I mean, come on. That's just good television. And to really sell the sports parody, they had Snagglepuss and Mildew Wolf as the hosts, dressed in those iconic yellow blazers that ABC sports announcers wore. It was a perfect spoof of the era's prestigious sports broadcasts, and it worked beautifully. The legal nightmare you never knew about. Alright, now we're getting to the stuff that blew my mind when I learned about it. Because what you saw on screen, that wasn't what they originally planned. Nope, not even close. See, Hanna-Barbera wanted to make this the ultimate crossover. Every single character they'd ever created all in one show. But there was a massive problem. They didn't actually own all the characters they'd produced over the years. Let me give you the biggest example. The really rottens were supposed to be led by Dick Dastardly and Muttley. You know, the villains from Wacky Races. That would have been perfect, right? Their entire shtick was cheating in races. They were born for this show. But here's the problem. Dick Dastardly and Muttley were co-owned by Heater Quigley Productions, and Hanna-Barbera couldn't secure the rights. So what did they do? They created knockoff characters. They took Mumbly, who was originally a heroic detective dog in his own 1976 series, and they basically turned him evil and made him the team leader. And get this, Mumbly had the exact same wheezing laugh as Muttley. It was the same voice actor doing the same laugh. They weren't even trying to hide it. And then they created the Dread Baron, who was basically Dick Dastardly with a slightly different mustache. Same outfit, same personality, same everything. Later, in the Laff-A-Lympics comic book published by Marvel, they actually revealed that Dread Baron was Dick Dastardly's twin brother. I'm not making this up. That's how they explained it. But it gets worse. The Scooby-Doobies were supposed to have the entire cast of Josie and the Pussycats. Melody, Alexander, Alexandra, Sebastian the Cat. They were in the original production art, but Archie Comics owned the underlying rights to those characters, and the licensing got too complicated. So they got replaced by Captain Caveman and the Teen Angels, who Hanna-Barbera owned outright. Same thing happened with Jeannie from the animated Jeannie series. Columbia Pictures Television owned the rights to her image and likeness because it was based on the live-action sitcom. So only Babu, her apprentice, made it onto the team. Jeannie herself got replaced by Hong Kong Phooey. Can you imagine being in those production meetings? Okay, we can't use this character, we can't use that character, let's just make up new ones that look exactly the same and hope nobody sues us. It's corporate legal drama, disguised as a Saturday morning cartoon, and none of the kids had any idea. Now let's talk about how they actually made this thing, because the production of Laff-A-Lympics was absolutely insane. You've got to remember, this was a 2-hour programming block with multiple shows, and Laff-A-Lympics itself had 45 characters appearing in every episode. That's a logistical nightmare. So how did they pull it off? Simple. They cut every corner they possibly could. Hanna-Barbera was famous for limited animation, basically doing the absolute minimum amount of drawing necessary to make something look like it was moving. A typical theatrical cartoon from the 40s or 50s might use 14,000 to 26,000 drawings. A Laff-A-Lympics episode? about 1,200 drawings for a 10-minute segment. They did this by reusing animation cycles constantly. Walking, running, cheering. They'd animate it once, and then just loop it for different characters with minor adjustments. Backgrounds got recycled from other shows. A mountain range from a Clue Club episode might show up in a Laff-A-Lympics ski race. And they used this technique called xerography, where they'd copy the animator's pencil lines directly onto the cells instead of hand inking them. It saved time and money, but it gave everything that sketchy look that was so common in 70s cartoons. Chuck Jones, you know, the guy who directed the classic Looney Tunes, he hated this style. He called it illustrated radio. Ouch. But here's what really blows my mind. The voice actors. Guys like Dawes Butler and Don Messick had to voice dozens of characters in the same episode. Dawes Butler was Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Snagglepuss, Quick Draw McGraw, and Wally Gator, often in the same scene, talking to each other. Don Messick was Scooby-Doo, Boo Boo Bear, and the villainous Mumbly. These guys were literally having conversations with themselves, switching voices mid-sentence. That's not just talent. That's superhuman. And here's a sad note. Alan Reed, the original voice of Fred Flintstone, recorded his appearance for the first episode, but he passed away shortly after. Henry Corden took over the role for the rest of the series and continued voicing Fred for decades. So, Laff-A-Lympics actually marks that transition in Hanna-Barbera history, the beginning of the end. So, we've talked about how Laff-A-Lympics came to be, how brilliant it was, and all the crazy behind-the-scenes drama. Now, let's talk about why it didn't last. The first season ran from 1977 to 1978, and it was a hit. 16 brand new episodes, plus the entire 2-hour programming block. Kids loved it, parents were okay with it because it wasn't violent, and ABC was dominating the Saturday morning ratings. But then, in the 1978 to 79 season, things started to change. First, they rebranded the show. It went from Scooby's All-Star Laff-A-Lympics to just Scooby's All-Stars. Not a huge deal, but it was a sign that they were pulling back. Then they cut the programming block from 2 hours down to 90 minutes. They dropped the Blue Falcon and Dynamite and the reruns of the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You? Suddenly, the All-Star block wasn't feeling so all-star anymore. And here's the kicker. They only produced 8 new episodes of Laff-A-Lympics for the second season. The rest of the time slots got filled with reruns from the first season. So what happened? Why did they pull back? Honestly, it comes down to 2 things: exhaustion and competition. First, the exhaustion. Producing a show with 45 characters, even with all those animation shortcuts, was incredibly expensive and time-consuming. The voice actors were stretched thin, the animators were working overtime, and the legal headaches with character rights weren't getting any easier. Second, the competition. By 1978 to 79, other networks were catching up. They were launching their own Saturday morning blocks with fresh ideas. The novelty of the crossover concept was wearing off, and the Scooby-Doo brand itself was starting to see a ratings decline across the board. So Hanna-Barbera made the business decision to scale back. They kept Laff-A-Lympics in syndication. It aired on USA's Cartoon Express, Cartoon Network, and Boomerang for years. But as a first-run series, it was done after just 24 episodes. 24 measly episodes. That's it. That's all kids got of this groundbreaking, ambitious, absolutely insane crossover event. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so it was a cool show that didn't last long. Why should I care? Here's why. Laff-A-Lympics was a proof of concept for something that's now everywhere in entertainment: the crossover event. Think about it. In 1977, nobody was really doing this. Nobody was taking characters from different shows, different eras, different franchises, and throwing them all together in one big event. Laff-A-Lympics proved that audiences loved it. They wanted to see their favorite characters interact. They wanted to see who would win in a competition. They wanted that shared universe experience. Fast forward to today, and what do we have? The Marvel Cinematic Universe, the DC Extended Universe, crossover episodes on TV, Smash Brothers in video games. It's everywhere. And Laff-A-Lympics did it first. But here's what I think is really cool. The show also expanded beyond just the TV series. Marvel Comics published 13 issues of Laff-A-Lympics comics from 1978 to 1979, and they went wild with it. They did time travel adventures. They had crossovers with the Jetsons and the Flintstones, stuff that would have been too expensive to animate on TV. They gave the really rottens, especially the Creeply family, way more character development. And then, in 2024, almost 50 years later, the show Jellystone did an episode called Laugh Games that was basically a love letter to the original series. And get this, they finally got to use Dick Dastardly and Muttley in their proper roles, leading the opposing team. It only took 5 decades to resolve that legal issue. The fact that creators are still paying homage to Laff-A-Lympics in 2024 tells you everything you need to know about its impact. So here's the thing about Laff-A-Lympics that I want you to take away from this video. On the surface, it was just a silly Saturday morning cartoon where Yogi Bear raced against Scooby-Doo while the really rottens tried to cheat their way to victory. But underneath, it was a desperate, yet brilliant, legally complicated attempt by a struggling animation studio to stay relevant in a changing media landscape. It was Hanna-Barbera taking every character they'd created over 20 years and saying, what if we put them all in one show? It was them navigating corporate ownership disputes, animation budget constraints, and advocacy group pressure, all while trying to make something that kids would actually want to watch. And you know what? It worked. For 2 glorious seasons, kids got to see the impossible. A true shared universe, where Huckleberry Hound could compete against Hong Kong Phooey, where Scooby-Doo and Yogi Bear existed in the same world, where 45 characters came together for one massive competition. Was it perfect? No. The animation was limited, the voice actors were overworked, and half the characters they wanted to use got replaced due to legal issues. But it was ambitious. It was groundbreaking. And it paved the way for every crossover event that came after it. So the next time you're watching an Avengers movie or a big crossover episode of your favorite show, remember, Laff-A-Lympics did it first, with nothing but limited animation, a couple of overworked voice actors, and a whole lot of corporate determination. And honestly, that's pretty damn impressive. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed diving into this forgotten piece of Saturday morning history, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, share this video with your buddies who grew up watching these cartoons, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future deep dives like this. Seriously, there are so many more stories from our childhood that deserve to be told, and your support helps me keep making them. I'll see you in the next one.